Thanks, Dr. Blasi. Hello, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about a true emerging bovine foreign animal disease and touch a little bit on the foreign insect that is associated with this disease. And the name of it is Theileriosis. And for those of you that are familiar with anaplasmosis, it's very, very similar to anaplasmosis. But as we go through today's presentation, there's some major differences between these two diseases as we go through. So one of the major differences is that Theileria orientalis ikeda, that's the species we're concerned with. There's two other species in cattle in the United States that do not cause clinical signs. They're not pathogenic. This one is, and the big thing is it's not a bacteria like anaplasmosis. It's a protozoa. And so when I talking about treatments, our treatments for this disease are very, very poor. And primarily that's because it's not a bacteria, it's a protozoa. It is a red blood cell parasite, just like anaplas is. So those are a little similarity there. Infection, clinical signs, if we look at the left-hand slide there, that's a normal blood smear of an animal non-infected with the anaplas or with Theileria. And on the right is an animal that actually the red blood cells are. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's little long strings of purple in there, and that's the protozoa. And what happens is the red blood cell, it can still, when it's infected, it can carry oxygen to the tissues, but the spleen doesn't think that they can. So the spleen scavenges these cells out of the circulation, and then we have anemic animals, and that's what brings on the clinical signs. Any age can be infected. So from a 2-minute-old calf to an 18-year-old cow, they can all become infected. And there is some possibility that even a certain percentage of calves born to positive animals, they can actually become infected in utero or before birth. Anemia, when it's severe, that's when we're going to see, again, the clinical signs. And because the oxygen, the body starved for oxygen, there's certain things that are going on in the body to say we need more oxygen, and that brings on our clinical signs. One of the most common one is we check pastures on a Sunday, we go back there on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and we've got one or more dead animals in the pasture or in the pen. Weakness, again, that comes from the fact they're anemic. Difficulty walking, they're starved for oxygen. All their tissues are, so they have a problem there. Pale mucous membranes, just a classical sign of anemia. They have a fever, rapid breathing. They'll breathe rapidly because the tissues are saying we need more oxygen. So then they're trying to bring more oxygen into the lungs. There's plenty of oxygen in the lungs. There isn't enough red blood cells to carry it to the tissues. And then icterus, the yellow tissues, very common with anaplasmosis and common with Theileria also. I've got the no sign over agitation. When we talk about anaplasm, we always warn producers that not every herd and not every animal, when they become clinical with anaplasm, will become agitated and very dangerous. Though we do mention it because it does happen. We have had no reports of that, and we've talked to lots and lots of herds. It's just the opposite. These animals are very docile. You can't even hardly move them. And so we don't talk too much about the agitation. Another difference between this and anaplasm is there's a number of cases where the dam or particularly the cow will develop edema, a fluid accumulation under the skin from the udder all the way up to the brisket. And that's just something we don't see in other diseases in the bovine world. So yeah, I think you all know what a normal white around the eye looks like. So this is obviously it's pale here. These are two pictures from a stalker place that had a bunch of deads from Theileria. See how yellow the membranes are around the eye. Then this is on necropsy. Super yellow, and at least in my experience, even more icteric than any of our anaplasmosis cases. It's almost a super, super bright yellow color. And then over here is a vulva of some heifers that have Theileria, so normal color, icteric, and then the paleness there. So those are classical signs that we have Theileria or anaplasm, and there's a couple other diseases that could cause that. We've worked with after today, over 72 herds. Some in Kansas, a lot in Missouri, a lot in Arkansas. And the reports, and we try to follow up. When we have a positive case in the laboratory, we try to follow up with phone calls to the veterinarian, the producer. And cow-calf herds, we primarily see it in the adult cows. And in those cases, it's usually just the morbidity or the number of animals that are ill, clinically ill, is typically low, 1 to 5%. Calves, still on the cow, it's rare that we're seeing clinical signs in those animals. Where we're seeing the biggest wrecks are in just weaned beef calves. And that's one of the biggest differences between Anaplas and Theileria is we rarely see Anaplas clinical signs in calves, but we often see it in weaned beef calves. And there's the morbidity can be very, very low to most of the pen or most of the animals in the group are sick. And the mortality is all over the board. A lot of times the mortality is very, very low, but occasionally it'll be a huge wreck. And I just pulled 3 of the cases that we are intimately involved with. Number 1, 150 calves, just weaned, brought in 400 weight. They had 4 dead, 65 clinical in about a 9 to 10 day period after arrival. 42 weaned calves from eastern U.S., 2 dead, 28 clinical, again about a 10 to 2 week period there. And then one of the biggest wrecks we dealt with were 126 calves from the eastern part of the United States. They ended up with 56 dead. They had basically the whole pen was sick. Now this pen had BVD circulating in it too, so we had immunosuppression, and then we had Theileria on top of it, and it was not a good scene. Notice up there I have eastern United States, and we'll talk about where we're seeing this particular disease now. And it is east of the United States, or east of Kansas particularly. In Kansas, these are what we've seen in the clinical infected. All of our clinical cases in Kansas are on animals that have been imported east of Kansas until 2 weeks ago. We had our first native-born, native-raised adult cow with clinical Theileria that died down in the very southeast part of Kansas. The hotbed right now is Arkansas and Missouri. So that didn't surprise us that it was that close and that we actually had a clinical case. Incubation or infection, this is just like Anaplas. Once an animal becomes infected, if they survive, they will be lifelong carriers. On Anaplas, a lot of times when they're carriers, sometimes if we stress them enough, we can actually initiate a clinical disease again. We're not seeing that with Theileria. Once they're infected in their carrier, they're basically immune to any clinical signs, even if they get reinfected. So a distinct difference. Incubation period, the estimates are all over the board. We think probably the best estimate is anywhere from a week to 60 days. And that's totally dependent on the health of the animal, how immune she is or he is, and then the dose that they're infected with at the initial infection. Transmission of Theileria orientalis akita, placenta, I mentioned that earlier. We don't really know, that's why the question mark's up there, but the best reports coming out of Australia and New Zealand who have dealt with this disease for over 100 years suggest about 10% of the dams that are positive will transmit this organism in utero. Horseflies, stable flies, deer flies, just exactly like Anaplas. The thing about this is this organism, live organism, can be found in the mouth parts of these flies, but there's never been any research that we know of where it actually showed that they could transmit the organism. So that's kind of a question mark. Mosquitoes, it's the same thing. They can find live Theileria in the mouth parts of mosquitoes. Now, whether they can transmit it or not, again, we do not know that. Sucking lice, same thing. And sucking lice is totally different from Anaplas. We don't worry about lice as a carrier in Anaplas. It may be that lice actually do play a role here. And the reason I bring that up, in Virginia, a veterinarian that we work with there, he said it was in the non-vector season for them, meaning there weren't any ticks, weren't any flies, weren't any mosquitoes. And they actually had a lice outbreak in this herd. And in 2 weeks, they basically had had a bunch of clinical signs of Theileria. So maybe our sucking lice can be carriers also. Needles, there aren't very many studies that show that it can be transmitted. We certainly have studies in anaplasm to show that it very easily is transmitted. Now, some thought out there is that a needle can transmit the organism, but it's not transmitting enough organism to cause clinical signs. And we're getting reports from the field that that may not be true. So there's a lot of unknowns here, and a lot of the things that we see here are different than what they're witnessing down in Australia and New Zealand, where they've dealt with it for a very long time. We do know the Asian longhorn tick is a carrier, and that's the foreign insect that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. We know that it is a carrier. These are the same tick, it's just different names. Australians call them bush ticks. Other parts of the world will call them cattle ticks, scrub ticks. But here in the United States, we call it the Asian longhorn tick. And it definitely is a transmitter of this particular organism. We always have questions. Are deer reservoirs like they are, or they can be for BVD, lepto, and other things? We know they can become infected, but we know we can try to become infected, but basically they have an immune system that keeps them from getting affected in clinical. And it's just like anaplasmosis. It's almost impossible, even experimentally, to make a white-tailed deer positive for anaplasm or Theileria. So our thought is that, or other people's thought is that, bovines are the source of Theileria for bovines. It's not our wildlife population. Prevalence, how much is out there? These are results from our laboratory. We were the first lab in the nation to develop a PCR for this when we started hearing that Virginia and West Virginia were having issues with Theileria, and that was in 2023. So we've had about 2,000 samples come through the lab, and about 53% are positive. Now, nobody's screening for this, meaning testing whole herds or part of whole herds, because it's a PCR. PCRs are anywhere from $25 to $32 per test. These are all from clinical cases, almost every one of these. So the prevalence looks really, really high, but that's because we're testing sick animals. This is what where the positive samples have originated. They have come into our laboratory, and it's by zip code. So the bigger the bubble, the more submissions that we've got. Now, it's by zip code. This veterinarian here never puts their client's zip code, so we use their clinic zip code, so it makes it look like there's a whole bunch here, but you can see where it is. And again, anything west of Missouri, all of these were animals that originated east of Kansas. Even this one out here was a bull that was actually on a cooperator herd over here in Missouri. So, except for that one cow that I talked about down there in the very southeast part of Kansas 2 weeks ago, that was positive for Theileria. So that's what it looks like across the nation. If we get closer, this is what it looks like. And right now, like I was telling Tim Parks earlier, that there isn't almost a day go by that we don't have a new herd in either Arkansas or Missouri that's popped positive for Theileria. So the poor producers down in here are really fighting this organism in a big way. Okay, treatment. Boy, we've worked with lots of herds that have tried every antibiotic known to man, or every treatment known to man, and without exception, zero response. There's been 2 or 3 veterinarians that believe that maybe LA200 helped them. I don't know if LA200 would be effective against protozoa or not, but that's the only thing that we've heard that's positive about treatment. And the thing about this disease, similar to anaplasm, that most, especially young, healthy animals, if we just provide them supportive therapy or supportive care, water, shade, feed, and a place to lay down, most of those will recover on their own. If you don't stress them, it's kind of one of the keys is a lack of stress. So that I just said that. The keys to survival, it's a stress thing. You want to buy time until their bone marrows have the opportunity to reproduce enough red blood cells so they're not anemic any longer. This is the tick. So it's a hard name to pronounce. That's why we call it the Asian longhorn tick, or you hear people just say ALT. It's the same thing. It officially was identified first in the U.S. in 2017, but then people started looking at ticks that were collected on the East Coast, and that's where it came in, was on the East Coast. They started looking at ticks even way back to 2010, and what they discovered there was that a lot of the ticks that they were calling a rabbit tick, which is very common, was actually this Asian longhorn tick. So we don't know, but it's been here since at least 2010, so it's been here a few years. This is the tick and where it's at. So it's endemic and native to Japan, Korea, parts of China, a little bit of Russia here. Again, Australia, New Zealand, they've had this disease for over 100 years. They've done some genetic work. They're convinced the tick came from Japan. Until a couple days ago, this map showed where maybe U.S. got the tick. It was either from the Orient or from Australia or New Zealand. And after some genetic work, it's been pretty well proven that our source is over here in the Orient too. It's genetically similar to what's going on over here where it's native. This is what it looks like. It's very nondescript. If you have a tick and you're not sure if it's an Asian longhorn tick, we've got parasitologists in the diagnostic lab that would identify it for you. So just put it in some type of container with a little alcohol. Don't put it in there when they're live. It freaks them out. A little alcohol, send it into us, and they'll identify it for free for you, just to make sure that you don't have the Asian longhorn tick. This is the size of it. I think most of you have seen the Lone Star tick, the little tick with the white on its back. Very small. This tick is about the same size, maybe a little bit smaller. This is what it looks like. The term longhorn came from, I don't know if you can see it, but there's two horns or two spikes here. We're looking at the mouth, the underside of it. There's two spikes here. You can kind of see it over here with that blue line. That's where the term longhorn came from. I don't know how they did that, but they've got spikes and we call them horns, so it's a longhorn tick. This is it's called a free host tick, and typically in a normal year, it takes a year from when the egg is laid to when it becomes adult. Now, entomologists have looked at this, and if the conditions are ideal, it can be a lot shorter. If there's harsh environmental conditions, these ticks will shut down their process, and it may take a year and a half up to 2 years for them to become adults. But typically 1 year. And the way this works is once the egg hatches into a larva, the larvae have to attach to some type of warm-blooded animal. They don't care what it is. They just need some blood to move on. They're going to feed for 3 to 4 days. They're going to fall off. They're going to molt into the nymphs. Now they have to find another warm-blooded animal. And again, it could be a bird. I don't think snakes are infected, but birds, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, it doesn't matter. Then as a nymph, same thing. They fall down or they fall off, molt into an adult, and then attach here as an adult, develop their eggs. When they're full of blood, they fall off and die and lay their eggs. So that's the life cycle of the tick. So this is typically what it looks like. So one of the differences between this and anaplasm is when this organism gets injected or put into a cow or a calf, it's going to attack the white blood cells first. And the researchers believe that there is no detrimental effect to the animal while this organism is in the white blood cells. And it'll molt a couple times, and then it'll break out, and then it'll infect the red blood cells. And then that's when the spleen clears it out and the anemia occurs. And the tick, once the tick feeds on the cow and becomes infected, it's going to allow that protozoa to reproduce in its body until basically all its tissues and all its fluids have this organism. And when ticks feed on a cow or bovine, when they're taking their blood meal, they're injecting saliva as an anticoagulant and anesthetic. and it's in the saliva. The saliva contains billions of these organisms, so they can inject a huge amount of organisms because they're going to feed multiple days. They're going to feed 3 to 9 days on an animal before they become full of blood. There was something back here that I wanted to, well, yeah, so what I want to mention here is that the adults cannot pass this organism to the eggs. So when these eggs hatch, they don't have Theileria. They're going to have to feed on an animal that's positive before they're going to be positive. So that's an important thing to think about. This is the craziest thing about this tick. It's called parthenogenic. They do not need males for reproduction. In fact, there hasn't been a male found since 2017 in the United States. I heard a report that maybe a couple weeks ago there was, but it hasn't been confirmed. But that just makes them more efficient, right? They don't have to, once they start taking a blood meal, they don't have to, yeah, you're like, we knew that all along. It'd be nice if we didn't. Anyway, I digress. But they're more efficient, right? They take their blood meal and make their eggs. They don't have to wait for a male to find them, impregnate them, and then lay their eggs. So it's something that makes them super efficient as far as laying eggs. They can lay up to 5,000 eggs, each one of these females. So not only are they efficient in making eggs, they produce a heck of a lot of eggs, and they can contaminate an environment very, very quickly. And the environment that they like brushy areas, longer grass. They don't like real short grass areas. They typically like warm temperatures. They do survive winters, and they do like a little elevated humidity. And we'll talk about where they think they might be living here for too long. They reside in these swarms within pastures. A friend of mine in Virginia, he's studying this Theileria. He went out to a pasture with his 4x4, and he said he got out and he knows that he was only out of that for 30 seconds. And when he got back in, he counted over 100 ticks on his legs. So, when our cattle and stuff go through that area, they're just infested. A tremendous amount of these organisms are out there in certain areas. This is where the counties that are positive, again, it started over here in New Jersey. Virginia and West Virginia are really hotbeds, have been for a while. Missouri, we've got several counties where this tick has been found. Just not too long ago, it was found in just the county south of Labette County, Kansas, in Oklahoma. So our parasitologists, entomologists, because of the environmental conditions in eastern Kansas, say this tick is in eastern Kansas, and their entomologists at K-State and some of our people are out looking for them, dragging for them. They haven't found them yet, but they're convinced that it's here. If they're not here today, it'll just be a matter of time before they are. These are all the species where this tick has been found to actually be attached. And the reason I bring this up is that there's a fair number of these organisms or these species that travel far distances. So it makes sense that this thing is going to continue to spread, or could continue to spread, because we've got a fair number of birds in there that are migratory and other animals. So just something to be aware of. This is a map of Virginia, and they did a study where it shows where this Theileria orientalis Ikeda is with the red. These are the counties in Virginia where they found the tick. So the common thing, that the thread out there, is that if you have the tick, you're going to have Theileria. If you don't have the tick, you're not going to have Theileria. So, and this kind of just reinforces that. So wherever this bugger goes, the disease is going to follow, or is already there. Future range, where do the people that look at these ticks think they're going to end up in the United States? University of Missouri, they did a modeling thing, and they're looking at the environmental conditions that these ticks could thrive in. And so the red areas are most likely where they would end up. And so the red areas are hot, could be hotbeds, but fair amount of Kansas, Missouri, and those areas, even eastern Colorado and western Kansas, which is a little bit strange when you think about they don't like short grass, but that's kind of where they're predicting it. A different modeler, a little less extensive, where she predicts that it'll be, but it's basically animals in this area that are, we can expect this tick to be living before long. I really like this research one. This researcher actually took the environmental conditions that they like and then looked at cattle density, and she came up with the predicted economic harm to cattle and showed where she predicts the major economic issues of this organism are to the cattle industry. Okay, we always have a question, can this tick carry other diseases? Yeah, it doesn't carry anaplasmosis or Lyme disease. In the laboratory, it can carry Rocky-Mountain spotted fever, which humans can get, and we see a lot of dogs with that. But as far as Lyme disease and anaplasmosis, research is pretty clear that these organisms cannot transmit those diseases. This is one of our concerns. Okay, we say it's the Asian longhorn tick, but who says that if one of our native ticks feeds on a positive animal, that they're not going to be able to transmit this disease like some of them do for anaplasmosis? So that's an unknown that we're sure of. And we've got plenty of ticks in our area. Now we've got the winter tick. The winter tick has been confirmed in Kansas in February in northwest Kansas. So that's another tick on the list. So that's an unknown, and that would change the game if these other ticks were able to transmit this organism. Control. We know that organophosphates, our pyrethroids, and our ivermectins are all effective against this tick. There are no products labeled for tick control, this tick control in bovines. There are for canine, I believe. There are multiple products labeled in Australia. And so I just took some pictures of them. So we've got the pyrethroids, we've got the organophosphates, we've got the ivermectins. I've got red lines over here because the label suggests on all of these that you retreat 10 days later, 7 to 10, every 10 days, every 7 to 10, every 14, every 21, and every 28 days. This tick is really, really hard to control, and I don't know if most producers or maybe any are going to be able to reapply, whether it's an injectable or a spray or a pour-on, that often. So that's something to be seen, I guess, in the United States. So prevention control, there isn't a vaccine available. There is a tick vaccine that's labeled for Asian longhorn tick. I don't have any information about that, no experience with it, but there is one out there for ticks. Biosecurity, don't bring in positives. Tick fly lice control, do the best you can on those. We don't have a lot of control on those. And then again, one time use needles so that we're not spreading it to the animals within the herd. And then just a summary. This is a protozoa, so it's more like crypto and coccidia. It's not a bacteria. It's a red blood cell parasite, just like anaplasmosis. Any age of animal can become infected. It causes anemia. Anemia is the thing that causes the clinical signs. If they don't, they can become infected, and a lot of them do not become severely anemic, and so we don't see the clinical signs in those animals. Transmitted through blood, maybe the placenta, but it's not going to be transmitted through milk or saliva or aerosols or anything like that. The insects, a lot unknown. We know the Asian longhorn tick, but can a horsefly, stable fly, deer fly, lice, and others carry it? I don't know that we know that. It's certainly possible, maybe. Once an animal is infected, if they survive, they're a lifelong carrier, just like anaplasmosis. There's no way to clear these animals. Treatment's very unrewarding. Talked about the supportive therapy and talked about the vaccines. So I blew through that pretty quick, but be happy to take any questions if anybody has them. Yes, sir. Say that again, sorry. That's the thing. Well, a positive tick could be transported on another animal. Yeah, so it could be either way. Yeah. No, the thought is that you can help control if you burn pastures, just like we do with the ticks that cause anaplasmosis, but there's nothing out there that they say you can actually clean up the pastures with this tick. It's different because it likes the brush in those kind of areas. So, yep. And I didn't show you this, but I showed you the map of Australia where those parts are infected with, they have the tick. Those are the only areas in Australia where they have Theileria. So it just reinforces the tick is so very important to this life cycle of this organism that without it, you're probably not, it's not going to perpetuate itself in the population. That's the belief today. Yes, ma'am. Say that again. So the question is Decox or Amprolium? Well, those are orals, right? So how much actually it would have to get into the bloodstream and to have any effect. So I don't think anybody knows that. And I don't believe those products actually become systemic or get into the bloodstream, but they are antiprotozoals. So say that again. The oral decox or any of those. Yeah, so, and you would know, so. Oh, you're talking to the wrong guy about that. That's an FDA, USDA thing, right? So I don't know that. You would think that would, but I don't know it. So the question is about, I knew we couldn't get out of it. Decker asking about the damn fly. It's 70 miles south of the border, the Texas border, as of a couple days ago. Don't freak out about this thing. Cannot overwinter here. So don't, even if we get it, it's not going to sustain itself. It can't overwinter. So if you're in South Texas and stuff, you know, it'd probably be a concern, but I'm getting on my soapbox. I kind of think we're overblowing this just a little bit. It's almost like we need to prove that we're actually doing something. So we're going to talk about this. I'm sorry, but I'm kind of cynical towards the government. Anyway, it's 70 miles south of Texas. The United States is going to build, the way they control the screwworm is that they release sterile males. And Mexico had a plan, but apparently they dropped the ball and they weren't producing what they were supposed to. So the United States is going to build a plant. I think they've already started in South Texas that'll reproduce billions of these sterile screwworm flies. So even if it gets up into Texas, there's, you know, it should be controlled in the next few years. This screwworm likes fresh tissue, so Decker has it. You don't have to worry about it. Any other questions? Well, awesome. Thanks again for the opportunity. So.